Welcome, everybody. And thank all of you for being here for our Socrates Dinner. It's our great honor and privilege, of course, to have Tom Friedman here. Tom is somebody who needs absolutely no introduction in Aspen. Everybody knows that he's the Bucksbaum son-in-law that they didn't take into the real estate business, but he was able to succeed anyway. So, Tom, thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you, Walter. Thank you.
You know, Tom has done everything as a journalist in terms of being a reporter, writer, and then a columnist. And I've always wondered, because I never ascended to that top level, how do you write a column?
Well, first of all, Walter, thank you and the Institute, and I always get to sit next to Kathy at these events where I'm with you, and that's always a treat.
Kathy does the seating.
Exactly. That's how it happens. Yeah. I feel doubly honored. And to our friends, Gary and Laura, I mean, what a great achievement you've made. We're here from the beginning. Ann and I are not the guests of honor. Socrates is the guest of honor. We're the facilitators for a great organization. So thank you, guys. It's really a treat. Well, it's the book I'm working on is really framed around how to write a column, and it's something I've thought about a little bit lately. And you know, a column is really an act of chemistry. A news story is meant to inform, and you can do it better or worse. I could write a story about this evening or whatever, and you'd read it and say you got it right, got it wrong. But a column is actually meant to provoke. It's meant to produce a reaction. So I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's what I do. I either do heating or lighting. I'm either stoking up an emotion inside of you, or I'm illuminating something for you, and if I do it right, I'll do both. And so I've always thought that a column, therefore, is actually an act of chemistry, to produce heat or light. And I think to do it, you have to combine three ingredients. The first is, what is your value set? What do you stand for? How do you lean into the world? Are you a Marxist, a capitalist, a Keynesian, a libertarian? You know, what is the value set you're trying to promote? Second is, how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the forces that are shaping more things in more places, in more ways, in more days. So as a columnist, I've always carried around in my head a working hypothesis of how the machine works. Once I called it Lexus Neolatry, once I called it The World is Flat. This book is my updated version. Because as a columnist, really what you're trying to do is take your value set and push the machine. And if you don't know how the machine works, you either won't push it, or you'll push it in the wrong direction, or you may push it over a cliff. And the third ingredient you have to have is, what have you learned about people and culture? There's no column without people. How does the machine affect people and culture? And how do different people and cultures respond to the machine? Mix those three together. Stir, let it rise for 45 minutes and bake. And if you do it right, you'll produce a column that produces heat or light.
Well, you said it's a theme of your book, which is Thank You for Being Late, out in November. How do you turn that type of thing into a book?
So, you know, the beginning of the book is talking about that. And as I was explaining it to someone, I really started to ask myself, well, if that's what a column is, what is my value set? Where did it come from? How do I think the machine works today? And what have I learned at 35 years at the New York Times about different people and culture? And so the book really goes back and explores my roots. I grew up in a small town outside of Minneapolis called St. Louis Park. And I went to high school with the same high school as the Coen brothers, Al Franken, Norm Ornstein, Michael Sandel, Peggy Ornstein, Alan Wiseman, Dan Wilson, who wrote Someone Like You with Adele. It was a freaky place.
And for the book, you went back there to see how it is, right?
So the book is actually divided into 4 sections. The first section is called Pausing. That's why it's called Thank You for Being Late. The need to step back when things are changing a lot and pause and reflect on where we are. The second section is called Accelerating, because I think the way the machine works today, what is shaping more things in more ways, in more places, on more days, in my view, is that we're in the middle of three nonlinear accelerations all at the same time with the three largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So Mother Nature is climate change, biodiversity loss, population. If you put global average temperature on a graph, we know what it looks like. It looks like a hockey stick. If you put Moore's Law, that the speed and power of microchips will double every 24 months on a graph, we know what it looks like. It looks like a hockey stick. And if you put the market, which for me is globalization, not trade just, but the globalization of flows, which can be anything from, Facebook flows to Skype calls to, Khan Academy lessons. If you put that on a graph, it looks like a hockey stick. So I think what's actually shaping more things in the world today is the fact that we're in the middle of these three accelerations all at the same time, and they're feeding off each other. So more Moore's Law, more technology drives more globalization drives more climate, drives more solutions to it. And so I go through those three accelerations, and that's the second part of the book. And one of the things I point out, I have any kind of introduction to each section, so introduction to the machine, introduction to pausing. And the introduction to the machine is called Moore's Law and What the Hell Happened in 2007. Because 2007 is an innocuous year. I mean, but there are vintage years in wine and there are vintage years in history. And in 2007, the iPhone came out. In 2007, something called Twitter came out. In 2007, something called Facebook came out. In 2007, something called Hadoop came out, created big data. Something called GitHub came out. For the greatest open source platform. Something called the Kindle came out. The internet crossed 1 billion users in 2007. The price of sequencing a human genome collapsed in 2007. Some amazing big data companies started then, Palantir. Michael Dell, who retired in 2005, came back to run Dell in 2007. And Intel, of course, went off silicon for the first time in 2007. For the first time, introduced non-silicon materials.
So how do these accelerations reflect in your hometown?
Well, the connection between the two, Walter, is I think what happened in 2007 was the greatest technological inflection point. I think it'll be seen in time as the greatest release of energy into the hands of human beings since fire. I think what happened that year was something phenomenal that we're now living with. And it changed four kinds of power. It changed the power of one. What one person can do now, we know is phenomenal. It changed the power of machines. Machines are getting to have all five senses. Never had that before. It changed the power of many. We as a collective are now a force of and in nature. The new geological era is being named after us, the Anthropocene, because we are now a force in nature. And lastly, it changed the power of flows. Ideas now flow and circulate at a speed we've never seen before. Barack Obama ran for president, saying marriage is between a man and a woman. He will leave the presidency saying marriage is between any two people who love each other and two human beings. I mean, ideas, the Confederate flag flew over the State House in South Carolina for, I don't know how many, 160 years, and boom, one shooting in a black church, and it's gone. So we're seeing ideas circulate now at a speed we've never seen before. So that's why I call this the great acceleration that we're in the middle of. And when things, I think what's going on in the world today, the biggest thing happening is people feel like they're in one of those people movers in an airport, those moving sidewalks. And they're on this moving sidewalk, it's kind of going along, and then in 2007, it went from about 5 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour. But meanwhile, after 2007 came 2008, and we went into complete political gridlock. So our political and social technologies froze, just as our technologies accelerated at a phenomenal rate. And I think we're living now in the gap between those two. We basically shut down politics right when we needed to be designing a whole new set and reimagining a whole new set of social and political technologies to go with this acceleration. Because these accelerations aren't just changing things, they're reshaping everything.
You say we shut down politics. Do you think it was the fault of politicians in Washington, or do you think that the American people sort of had a reaction to things like trade, globalization, technology, where they said, hey, a lot of people are winning, but I'm losing, and stop this machine?
Well, the two are connected. I think that's what happens when you go with your physical technologies, but you don't come with the social technologies to go with it. So yes, I'm a huge believer in free trade. I'm also a huge believer in wage insurance. That should go with it for communities that are hammered by free trade. So we did the free trade thing, but we never did the social technologies to go with it. I think that's happened across a broad front, and that's how you opened up this huge gap now between what people are feeling in the world they're living in and the kind of things they need to thrive in the age of acceleration. So, my book has, I joke, has a theme song. It's by Brandi Carlile. She's a country folk singer I really like. And she's got a song called The Eye, E-Y-E. And the main refrain is, you can dance in a hurricane as long as you're standing in the eye. Mm-hmm. And I think what people are being asked in the world today is to dance in a hurricane. Now, people like Trump come along and say, I'm going to stop the hurricane with a wall. No, that is not going to work. You need to build an eye that can move with the storm, take energy from it, but create an island of serenity within it. And that's what got me back to Minneapolis.
One of the things that happened is when you came out of Minneapolis, journalism had a certain pattern to it. People got trained. We're talking about an age of acceleration, and I think some of the fault, with all due respect to us, is the media sort of lost its bearings. You were trained by, they sent you to Beirut, they sent you, to Jerusalem, they sent you to the State Department, the Treasury Department, the White House, and slowly you were trained. Nowadays, people can just spout any opinion they want, and we have more opinions and less reporting. Do you feel that?
Well, I can only tell you what I do, and I certainly feel that in general, for sure. I always tell people, my big advantage, I'm actually not smart enough to sit in my study and kind of, opine about the world. I need to go out and talk to people. And I envy people who may be smart enough to do that, but I'm not, And I think it's a great advantage. I believe in reported opinions. All my opinions, I start with my Minnesota kind of value set, a kind of basic, moderate, centrist, outlook on the world. But then I have to report things. So I only know what I think after I report them. I live by the motto, if you don't go, you don't know. Going, by the way, doesn't ensure that you'll get it right. I've tested that theory in Iraq in particular. But it does reduce the odds you'll get it wrong. And you can learn much quicker.
You're so associated with the world is flat theory, which is that we live in an era of globalization and things happen. And in that book, besides having that theory, you had a lot of prescriptions, like if you're going to prepare for a flat world, this is what you need to do. It seems to me from Brexit to what's happening in France, the rise of nationalism, maybe the Donald Trump phenomenon, it's all a backlash against a flat world in which somehow people feel, whoa, I got left out of this one.
Yeah, there's no question. You have a lot of things going on. One, I think Brexit has a lot to do with immigration and fear of immigration and fear of losing home, And because I'm deeply connected to Minnesota and the town I grew up in, because I grew up in a real community and an amazing community, wonderful people. And I was telling Kathy, what really inspired the book was, and I also grew up in those amazing years right after the war, when America stood astride the world with overwhelming force, when our economy was the envy of the world, and when my parents, joining the middle class, was an elevator ride. They got in the elevator and pressed MC. They went to the middle class floor. They got off and stayed there. It wasn't walking up a down escalator, which it is today. And so those were...
What did they do?
My dad worked for a friend of his company, sold ball bearings, and my mom was a bookkeeper and a world-class bridge player.
But where was she a bookkeeper?
She was a bookkeeper at the Lincoln Delicatessen in Minneapolis, which was...
well, I was going to say, yeah. All right, we got a fan of that. They catered tonight. Yeah. But a ball bearing plant, there's so many people who got to the middle class, whether it be in England because they worked at a shipyard in Sherborne or in Newton, Iowa because they worked at the Maytag plant or near Minneapolis because they worked at the ball bearing plant. Those things don't exist anymore. Was that a mistake?
Well, I think it was inevitable. If horses could have voted, there never would have been cars. So we've gone from a manufacturing economy to a service economy to a knowledge economy, and and the most dangerous time, to be on the streets of New York City was when cars were just being introduced, but horses and buggies were still on the streets, and that's when you don't want to be on the road. That's what we have right now, where you're in this transition between two kinds of economies. And in these kind of moments, I actually begin this book by explaining why I went into journalism. People go into journalism for a lot of reasons. Some want to be crusaders, some want to be investigative reporters, financial reporters, and God bless them all, we need everybody. I went into journalism because I love being a translator from English to English. That's what I like to do. I like to take really complex subjects and see if I can break them down first for myself, and then if I can, explain it to others. Because I happen to believe that's my form of idealism, because I think as the world gets more and more complex, people are really seeking nonpartisan sense makers to help them navigate. Because if you don't have people doing that, that's where you get a Donald Trump. That's where you get people to come in and try to simplify and dumb down everything. And when that happens, when the world gets fast, Walter, it's like an airplane going really fast. Small errors in navigation can really get you off course.
I'm going to open it up for questions, but I want to turn quickly to geopolitics. You wrote a book many, many years ago, From Beirut to Jerusalem. The really unfortunate thing about that book is it's still true.
Yeah.
The geopolitics of that region is still riven by tribalism and a mess. Give us your view of the geopolitics now, what we should be doing.
So, I wrote that book came out in 1989. I wrote it in 1988. And for many years, my publisher asked me to do an update, and I said I would. It would be a very short, one page, one line, nothing has changed. And then Oslo happened, and I thought, wow. And I finally did an update for Oslo. I thought maybe that was it. And
that was the Palestinian-Israeli
peace agreement, yeah. And of course, that came a cropper. The Middle East is really a tragic region right now. In general, there are great pockets. There's parts of Israel doing amazing, there are parts of the Gulf that are doing amazing, and basically, I think the world we're going into is a world in which the ROI on pluralism is going to explode, because I think we're going into not only a post-imperial world, not only a post-colonial world, but I think we're going into a post-authoritarian world. So the Middle East, of course, in the Arab world, was a pluralistic region that lacked pluralism. So its pluralistic character, Sunnis, Shiites, Kurds, Druze, Christians, Muslims, was always controlled by an iron fist from the top down. That was Saddam Hussein, Hafez al-Assad, Muammar Gaddafi. All these states, basically, were pluralistic societies controlled by an iron fist from the top down. And basically what happened is after 2001, we removed one of those fists. The people tried to remove the others, or we removed two, and we included Libya. And so suddenly these regions, these states had to go from vertical control to horizontal control.
Was that a mistake?
Let me finish this argument, and then we'll go to that. They had to go from being controlled from the top down with an iron fist to forging social contracts horizontally between shared citizens, basically. So when you're going from vertical to horizontal, you need one of three tools. One is if you have a Mandela who can make that transition from a vertical control to a society built on social contracts. It turns out there was only one Mandela, and he didn't work the Middle East. A second is if you have a military, a far-sighted military, that can do that. We thought the Egyptian military was that. Turned out they're much more interested in owning their network of hotels and really didn't play that role. The third way is if you have a midwife. That was the role we were supposed to play in Iraq and Libya, and turned out we didn't know what we were doing. If you have no Mandela, no military, and no midwife, you have the absolute chaos you have today, where the iron fist is removed at the top, but they can't get to horizontal control. And the one place that made it, and this gets to your question, was it a mistake? I always point out the one Arab Spring country that succeeded is the one we had nothing to do with, which is Tunisia. And the reason it succeeded was because Tunisia had civil society. It actually had unions, it had lawyers associations, it had women's groups. And that civil society turned out to be the mediator between the secular and religious, and that's why they won, rightly, the Nobel Peace Prize.
So should we be trying to get rid of Assad?
At this stage, Syria is so complicated. There's one certain lesson from Iraq is that, and I think the administration and others have learned it, is never destroy the government of these societies. If you can get Assad to leave and have a transition, great. But if you collapse the state, as we did in Iraq, getting it back is well nigh impossible. But the real challenge, I say, going forward, why is pluralism going to be such an attribute? Why is it in our own country that for all our troubles, especially this week, we're still the only country in the world that has twice elected a black man whose middle name is Hussein, whose grandfather was a Muslim, who defeated a woman to run against a Mormon. Now, who does that, okay? So that is like so freaky to the rest of the world. Now, Lord knows we've learned that maybe that wasn't the end of the Civil War we thought it was. But the ability to manage pluralistic societies with pluralism is such a huge advantage when top-down authority is collapsing everywhere, and where in a fast world you can collaborate with anyone. And if you have a pluralistic society that can collaborate with anyone, you are going to have such an advantage in this world. And so I weep for the Middle East because they're not there. They've in Syria, tragically, 5 years of just a horrific civil war. And when you fall behind in this world, when that moving sidewalk is moving, you don't fall behind arithmetically. You fall behind exponentially.
And we're actually retreating from some of the pluralistic values. Yeah. Although I will say India might be the country that comes close to be able to.
Right, and I've had a huge soft spot for India, and because India is a miracle. India's people speaking 125 different languages.
That Muslim president,
Muslim,
and a Hindu,
and they have free and fair elections every 4 years.
And they'll surpass China, do you think, in GDP in the next 10 years?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Walter. Whenever I go to India, people ask me about China. Whenever I go to China, people ask me about India. And so I developed an answer. And I said, you're both like two superhighways. The Chinese superhighway, 6 lanes, perfectly painted lane stripes, sidewalks, street lamps. Everyone's going 80 miles an hour. There's just one problem. Off in the distance, there's a speed bump called democratic reform. And when 1.3 billion people hit a speed bump going 80 miles an hour, one of two things happens. Car jumps up, slams down. Everyone says, you okay? You okay? I'm okay. Drive on. The other thing that happens is all the wheels fall off. And we don't know which it's going to be. Now, India, 6 lanes, no lane dividers. Half the street lamps are out. Sidewalks are crumbling. It's total chaos. There's a cow crossing the road every few miles. But off in the distance, it looks like it spreads out into a perfect 6-lane superhighway. Is that a mirage or is that the oasis? I don't know. So I think they both have big question marks hanging over them.
My last question is getting back domestic, and then we'll open it up, which is politics is a mess, as you've said. Is there any way to make lemonade out of the lemons we face this year?
Well, I'm reluctant to get political. First of all, has everybody paid for the dinner so far? Is everyone, they all paid up?
Well, don't insult.
So just if anybody walks out, it's
be nice.
I'll be as nice as I can. I will tell you what I'm rooting for. As someone, by the way, who's written numerous times, I really think our country has to have a healthy center-right party. Otherwise, it won't have a healthy center-left party. But I think we're in a real mess. And I think the only way we're going to get out of this mess is I would like to see Hillary Clinton win this election. I'd like to see her win all 50 states. I'd like to see the Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court, and the White House, okay? Well, don't clap. This is not on crossfire. This is a serious argument. Because I think if she does, 3 things will benefit the country. One is she'll rule from the center. She will not owe the left wing of the Democratic Party anything. I think she'd be smart enough to see this as an opportunity, number one. Number 2, we can get the 3 things done that we have to get through. We have got to have common sense gun laws in this country. And this Congress, as it is presently constituted, with the Republicans controlling the House, we will never get common sense gun laws, number 1. Number 2, we have to, I believe, borrow $100 billion at 0% interest, which we can do now, and have a massive national infrastructure upgrade project. This country can't get that passed now. And thirdly, I think we could fix whatever's wrong with Obamacare, and I don't even know, I'm not an expert at it, but I think you could actually fix it rather than trash it in the middle now and try to do something else.
Do you think we would get a center-right party out of that?
Well, I think the other 2 things that would be a byproduct of that is I believe personally, and I'm just telling you what I've written in my column, I think Donald Trump not should just be defeated. I think he needs to be extirpated. I think he needs to be crushed because I think he's a man who is mainstreaming. Don't clap, really. I think he's someone who's mainstreaming hate in this country. He's mainstreaming name-calling. He's mainstreaming retweeting stuff from white racist websites as a presidential candidate. And that, I want to send the message, the likes of you should never come this way again. And the third thing I think would happen, and I think this would be enormously healthy, is that the Republican Party, if they are really defeated, will go on a retreat, and they will figure out where they are, and they will become a true center-right party, and that would be a great thing for the country. So that's my wish.
Well, I'm going to stick away from politics. I'm going to take questions. I saw Robin Wright. Where are you, Robin? Oh, you stand up. Maybe not, because way back. Robin, I'm sorry to pick on her to do the first question, but as you all know, writes for the New Yorker, written for the Washington Post, Sunday Times of London, my old newspaper, but really has done some amazing work, having gone to Iran and also written about Syria. So maybe say something, but ask a question, then I'm going to get to the people who've raised their hands there.
More importantly, she's a dear old friend of Anna Mine's from Beirut.
And I have to say, I have such extraordinary memories. Tom was the most energetic, dynamic, smart reporter, and we all wanted to know what the hell Tom was reporting so that we could get anywhere close to him.
Thank you.
And the interesting thing was that Ann was the one who had the big ideas. And so that we loved finding out what Tom was doing, but Ann was the one who had the great wisdom. And I'm delighted that one of their daughters is here because I remember when they were trying. So my Socrates seminar is looking at the great upheaval in the Middle East. And because you and I go back such a long way, we were in Beirut together in the early 1980s, I want you to address, first of all, what the borders of the region look like a decade from now, and what borders are in our interests, because they may not be the same answer.
And real quickly, I will recommend a piece you wrote on the Sykes-Picot agreements of 110 years ago and how those borders were a mistake.
That's a really, really good question. Next question back there, please. Yeah, you all the way back. No. Robin, you know, it's a really good question, and I don't know. But if I'm looking for light in the tunnel, the one thing I would latch onto is something we both experienced and lived through, and that is the Taif peace agreement in Lebanon. And the Taif peace agreement was forged in 1989. The Lebanese Civil War began in 1975. So it took 14 years of civil war. People got so exhausted, so frustrated, so impoverished, that Sunnis, Shiites, Christians came together in the Saudi resort town of Taif and reached an agreement. And it was based on two principles. One was no victor, no vanquished, okay? We're going to share power. And number two, the minority gets overrepresented. So the Christians, who are only 35% of the population, got 50% of the seats. To Robin's fundamental question, if there is going to still be a Syria, and if there's still going to be an Iraq, and Lord knows I wouldn't venture to predict, it'll only be if they follow that approach, that finally the parties get exhausted, that in Syria you have no victor, no vanquish, and the Alawite minority, the Shiite minority is in fact overrepresented, and in Iraq, the Sunnis and Shiites and Druze get exhausted, and the Kurds, and you have a Shia majority, and the Kurds and the Sunnis are overrepresented.
And trying that pluralistic mix is better than redrawing the borders and letting the Sunnis have a state, the Shias have a state, etc.?
I actually think so. I think that'll be deadly for them.
All right. Sorry, was it Stuart? Yeah, Stuart. No. Yeah. You want to call him?
No, you do.
I'm a Republican, and I love everything you said.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
I want to know how you met Ann, being from Minnesota.
Wow.
Isn't Minnesota a suburb of Des Moines?
That's a great question, Stuart. And my good fortune, we had, well, the real truth is, I went to Brandeis as an undergrad, and Ann went to Stanford, and her boyfriend from Des Moines, Iowa, went to Brandeis for 1 year, and then he said, I'm leaving, I'm transferring to Stanford to be with my girlfriend. And he transferred to Stanford to be with his girlfriend, now my wife. And I don't know what happened, but I'm glad it happened.
I'm shocked.
Okay, and they broke up, and I had a Marshall Scholarship after Brandeis. And Anne graduated Stanford in 3 years and told her father that he owed her a year of college. And she wanted to go to the LSE in London and do the 1-year master's degree, and her old boyfriend introduced us. And that's how we met.
Great. Questions? Sorry. Yes. Is that?
Environmental, your idea of a carbon tax, which you've been writing about for years, and I totally agree with that. Yeah. And are we ever going to get any progress on this?
Well, I'd kind of put that in a larger framework, which I do in my book. And let me take a minute to explain. In answer to Walter's question, I answered, here's where we are politically and how do we get out of it, and that's the only way I can think of it. But if you ask me, sort of, what if you got to just start over? What if we, could form our own party? Okay. So, one of the things I explain in this book is that I think we're actually in the middle of these different accelerations, the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. We're going through 3 climate changes at once right now. Actually going one through the climate, one in the climate of technology, and one in the climate of globalization. We're actually going through 3 climate changes at once. So what do you want when the climate changes? You want 2 things. You want resilience, and you want propulsion, because you want to be able to grow and go forward. You don't just want to be resilient. So as I thought that through in writing the book, I said, who can I talk to about resilience in the climate change? And then I realized that I knew a woman. She's 3.8 billion years old, and her name's Mother Earth, and she's actually been through more climate changes than anybody. So I interview Mother Earth, and I say, Mother Earth, how do you deal with climate change? And she says, well, first of all, I'm incredibly adaptive through natural selection. Really kind of brutal way, but second, she says, I love pluralism. I love diversity. I try 20 different species, see who wins. Third, she says, I'm incredibly sustainable. Everything is food. Eat food, poop seed. Eat food, poop seed, okay? Fourth, she says, I believe in ownership. When an ecosystem is in balance, it really owns that space. Fifth, she says, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see an open space, I fill it with a plant or animal species perfectly adapted to that niche. And lastly, she says, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I kill all my failures. I return them to the great manufacturer in the sky. And I use their energy to nourish my successes. So my argument is that the party that mirrors Mother Nature's killer apps is the party or country that will thrive the best in the age of acceleration. So I call my party a fourth party, not a third party, because who wants to be a third party between 2 dead ideas? I'm actually for a fourth party, okay? I'm a nonpartisan extremist. So on a lot of issues, I'm actually to the left of Bernie Sanders, because I think in the age of acceleration, we're going to need stronger safety nets, but I'm also to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I believe we should eliminate the corporate tax. I would replace it with a carbon tax, a tax on sugar, a tax on bullets, and a small financial transaction tax. So I'm a nonpartisan extremist. And I think the party, eventually we're going to get there. We're going to get to a party that mirrors Mother Nature. What is she? She's agile. She's heterodox. She's hybrid. She lets things co-evolve that should co-evolve. Bernie Sanders doesn't have a clue how to pay for anything he's advocating. The Wall Street Journal, okay, can't deal with the fact that there are a lot of people falling behind, all right? These 2 ideas should co-evolve. We should be getting radically entrepreneurial at the same time as we take care of the people who are falling behind in the age of acceleration. A Mother Nature party would let those things co-evolve together. That's what nature does, but our political system won't let you do that. If you're a Democrat, you have to be for these things. That's how they raise money. If you're a Republican, you have to be for these things. That's how they raise money. They can't let things co-evolve that should co-evolve.
Further, thank you. The way back, we'll start there and then, okay. Well.
Thank you for being here. I've been reading your stuff since college. I almost feel like your craft is to politics what songwriting is to emotion. So thank you for
bless
helping
your
us.
Heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you for helping us contextualize
Thank
this.
you.
So my question would be, what do you see as the future of free participatory societies in the digital age when there are so many threats that so many of us are perceiving as threats and thinking about as threats?
It's a really good question. Let me. One of the things that bothers me right now, deeply, frankly, is the unseriousness that you see of people on the national stage. Ann and I have a dear friend from Zimbabwe, and sometimes you have to be a foreigner to appreciate this. And one day we were talking about all this, and she said to us, you Americans, you kick around this country like it's a football. It's actually not a football. It's a Fabergé egg. You can drop it. You can break it. And that's what I feel sometimes when I hear a Ted Cruz trashing the government. Do you know what a Russian would give for one day of our Justice Department? Do you know what someone living in Syria would give for one day of the FBI? What someone else would give for a day of the IRS or the SEC or the FCC? These are precious institutions. And we're so lucky to live in a country that has them. Yes, fix them, but don't dump on them, And at the same time, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, I've never seen anything like this. You come out for Brexit, and then you say, oh, sorry, I'm leaving. Really? I mean, this is breathtaking in its recklessness and irresponsibility. And so, what we have is such a privilege, but it's got to be defended. It doesn't come natural. Maybe because I lived in the middle of I went from Minnesota to Beirut, okay? And that had a big effect on me. I went from one of the great communities to watch a community break apart. It can happen. I worry about Dallas a lot. I'm seeing aberrant things in our country, and I'm seeing a political leader trying to mainstream hate. And that is a really bad thing, because I lived through it in Israel. I was there on the eve of Rabin's assassination. I saw what happens when you heat up the molecules. Somebody 3 layers down the line, they don't get the nuance that that's actually not a Jewish star, it's a sheriff star. Or they don't get the nuance, about what you said, you really like Mexicans, it's just the ones who are rapists you don't like. They don't get the nuance. So you start heating up the molecules like this, something bad will happen.
Well, wait, to be fair, don't you think the molecules are being heated up by the other side as well, including some of these, left and radical movements?
Not anywhere near what Donald Trump is doing. No.
Next year we will have
Paul,
we will have Paul Jagot here to defend the Wall Street Journal page. But yes, last question.
Hi, thanks for speaking with us. America is a nation of immigrants. My father was an immigrant. My ancestors on my mom's side were immigrants. And currently we have millions of undocumented immigrants. We have immigrants that we train at our elite educational institutions, and then we send them back home to start their companies and create their change. What do you see as the future of immigration in this country?
Well, you know what I've written. I mean, I'm super pro-immigration. I do, though, believe we should control our borders. I think the only way to, that's why my position on immigration is I'm for actually a very high wall with a very big gate. Okay. That I think you have to control the border so people have confidence that they do live. A country without borders isn't a sovereign country. But then I want to have a very big gate that welcomes both the lower skilled but high energy immigrants that my grandparents were, as well as the great minds and who go to Silicon Valley and start all of these countries. We are so lucky we have the pluralism to absorb and attract both the energetic and the intellectually advanced ones, and sometimes it's both. But it's Armenian friend of mine always says, immigrants are paranoid optimists. They're optimists because they came from somewhere bad and they came somewhere they thought would be better. But they're always paranoid that they can lose it. And how lucky are we? Look at Japan. Why has Japan been struggling in the age of acceleration? Because do you know anyone who became a Japanese lately? You know, I mean, just, it's really hard, you know. These homogeneous societies are going to be really challenged. Now, you can have like Korea's a very homogeneous society, but it has pluralism of ideas. You know, if you have pluralism of ideas, if you're open in that sense to learning, you can do it. But I believe pluralism, immigration, ideas, gender pluralism, that having that in the age of acceleration is the single greatest comparative advantage a country can have. When I'm really depressed, this is what I do. I really do this. I call a company like GE and I say, I want to come up to your research lab in Niskayuna, New York. And I go up there and you know what you see. You see the United Nations. You see these incredible minds all coming together and working together. And, this to me is the challenge, and this really gets to a close with Walter's opening question, which was, you went back to Minnesota. And so why did I go back? I went back in part because this moment of rancor now we have in our country is really depressing me. And I wanted to go back. I didn't want to do anything. I don't want to go to the Middle East actually ever again. I'm really tired of it. And I have nothing more to say. And so I went back to Minnesota to reconnect myself with this really amazing place where politics worked, where pluralism really worked. Now, in my day, when I grew up in the mid-'50s, my parents grew up in the north side of Minneapolis, which was a ghetto of blacks and Jews. And in the mid-'50s, one suburb, St. Louis Park, would accept the Jews. And all the Jews of North Minneapolis moved en masse in a space of 3 years to one suburb. So the Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man, is about our Hebrew school. Because a suburb that was 100% Scandinavian Protestant Catholic overnight became 20% Jewish, 80% Protestant Catholic. So my first chapter on Minnesota is always looking for Minnesota. I go back and I tell the story of how we all got to know each other. And it was a struggle, and there were broken dates and broken friendships, and we all got to know each other. And if Israel and Finland had a baby, it would be St. Louis Park, okay? And out of that came an incredible explosion of energy that produced people like the Coen Brothers and Michael Sandel. And it wasn't just the energy they had. Bob Dylan came from Hibbing. But they all had incredible, all these guys, Al Franken, they all have a huge belief in civics, institutions, American democracy, because our forefathers were Humphrey, McCarthy, Mondale. And remember, Minneapolis was the most anti-Semitic city in America in the mid-'50s. Hubert Humphrey, before he gave the civil rights speech at the 48 convention, his real claim to fame was that he rid the Minneapolis city government of anti-Semitism. He practiced on the Jews before he got to black-white relations. So I go back to my suburb now 40 years later. First I tell the story of what it was. Now I go back. Now what do I find? I find that I left Minnesota to discover the world, and I came back 40 years later, and the world had discovered Minnesota. My high school is now 50% white Protestant Catholic, 10% Latino, 10% Jewish, and 30% Somali and African American, but more Somali, because the one suburb that would take the Jews was the one who would take the Somalis. Now the story of my suburb is actually the story of America. Can the inclusive values that worked on white Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, now can it work on a much more diverse population? And this was an important year, because this year is the first year that all the public schools in America, for the first time, are 51% minority majority. So that is the workforce of the future. The younger you go in Minneapolis, St. Paul public schools are 78% non-white. Minneapolis is 69%. St. Paul mostly Hmong. And so the challenge of, can they bring that inclusive, pluralistic ethic to a whole new community? That's why what happened in St. Paul breaks my heart, And I can only tell you what I found. And I'll tell you what I found, that the story is still out. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know if it's going to work. But here's what I found. There's a lot of people there who want to get caught trying. And I think that's what distinguishes the place. And so what I really When I think of Minnesota today and that challenge, I think of something Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute. Whenever you ask Amory, are you an optimist or a pessimist? He says, I'm neither. Because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be awful. Amory says, I believe in applied hope. And what I do see in Minnesota, and what makes me an optimist still, is I do see a lot of people applying hope. But I don't know how the story ends. But I'll tell you, that story now, that's the story of America. And that's why I wrote about it in my book.
Well, the subtitle is An Optimist's Guide to Surviving in the Age of Acceleration.
Thank you,
Tom, for
Thanks,
being
pal.
with us.
Appreciate it.